Somewhere right now, there's a motorcycle with over 200,000 miles on it. Same engine, same frame, never been rebuilt. And the rider isn't some genius mechanic. He doesn't spend every weekend in the garage. He just does 7 specific things consistently, things that most riders never even think about. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what those 7 things are, but more importantly, you'll understand why they work, because that's what makes them stick. And number 4 is the one that surprises every rider who hears it for the first time. Let's start from the beginning. Habit 1. They never skip the first 500 kilometers. Most riders buy a new bike and immediately want to feel what it can do. Full throttle on the highway, hard acceleration from every light, and this is where the damage begins before the bike even has a single service done. The first 500 kilometers of any motorcycle's life are called the break-in period, and what happens during this window determines the mechanical sealing of that engine forever. Here's why. When your engine is brand new, the metal surfaces inside, the piston rings, the cylinder walls, the camshaft lobes, they're not perfectly smooth yet. They need to wear against each other under controlled conditions to create a perfect seal. This process is called seating, and it only works properly if you keep RPMs varied and moderate during that first 500 kilometers. Riders who redline a new engine before it's broken in never get perfect ring seal. Their engine burns slightly more oil from day one, loses compression slightly faster, and reaches the end of its life thousands of kilometers earlier than it should have. The damage from those first few hundred kilometers follows that engine for its entire life. So if your bike is new, treat the first 500 kilometers like the most important kilometers you'll ever ride. Vary your RPMs, avoid sustained high speed, and let the engine build itself the right way. Habit 2. They treat oil like it's the engine's blood. Here's something most riders don't fully appreciate. Your engine oil is not just a lubricant, it's a cooling agent, it's a cleaning agent. It suspends metal particles and combustion byproducts and carries them to the filter. And it does all of this while surviving temperatures that would destroy most liquids. But oil degrades. Every kilometer it travels through your engine, it breaks down a little more. The additives that protect your metal surfaces get used up, the viscosity changes, and an engine running on old, degraded oil is essentially running on a liquid that's lost most of its protective ability. Riders who hit 200,000 miles change their oil on time every single time, not close to the interval, on the interval. And many of them change it slightly earlier than recommended because they understand that the cost of oil is nothing compared to the cost of engine damage. One more thing on oil that almost nobody talks about. Always use the viscosity grade your manufacturer specifies for your climate. Not what your neighbor uses, not what was on sale, the exact specification for your temperature range. Because the wrong viscosity means the oil film between your metal surfaces is either too thin or too thick, and either way, your engine pays the price. Habit 3. They never ignore the chain. Your chain is the most visible mechanical component on your motorcycle. It's also the most neglected. And a poorly maintained chain doesn't just wear itself out, it actively destroys your sprockets, stresses your gearbox output shaft, and in worst cases, snaps its speed and takes out your engine casing or your rear wheel. Riders with high-mileage bikes clean and lubricate their chain every 500 to 800 kilometers. They check tension regularly because a chain that's too loose slaps and stretches, and a chain that's too tight puts direct stress on the wheel bearing and gearbox bearing. Here's the part most people miss. Chain lubrication isn't just about the rollers you can see. The lubricant needs to penetrate to the inner plates where the actual wear happens. This means applying lubricant to the inside of the chain, at the sprocket, while rotating the rear wheel slowly, not spraying the outside and calling it done. A well-maintained chain lasts twice as long, and the sprockets behind it last even longer.
Habit 4. They respect the heat cycle. This is the one that surprises people, and it sounds almost too simple to matter. Every time your engine heats up from cold to full operating temperature and then cools back down, that's one heat cycle. And the way metal expands and contracts during this cycle affects every gasket, every seal, and every threaded fastener on your engine. Riders who make their bikes last don't shut the engine off immediately after hard riding. They spend the last 2 to 3 kilometers riding gently, allowing the engine temperature to begin dropping gradually before shutdown. This prevents heat soak, which is when residual heat continues cooking oil and seals after the cooling system stops working at shutdown. They also never park a hot engine in direct sun immediately after riding. They let it breathe. They let the heat escape naturally. This one habit alone extends the life of every rubber seal and gasket on the engine significantly. Habit 5. They never ride on reserve longer than necessary. Your fuel tank has a reserve for emergencies. It's not a second tank. It's the bottom of your main tank where sediment, water contamination, and fuel degradation products collect over time. Riders who regularly run on reserve are pulling that contaminated fuel directly through their fuel system, through the fuel pump, through the filter, through the injectors or carburetor jets. Over time, this causes blockages, injector wear, and fuel system damage that is expensive to fix and completely avoidable. High-mileage riders refuel when the gauge hits a quarter tank, not empty, not reserve, a quarter tank. It's a small habit with a surprisingly large impact on fuel system longevity. Habit 6. They listen to the bike. This sounds vague until you understand what it actually means. Every mechanical problem your motorcycle will ever have announces itself before it becomes catastrophic. A new vibration, a slightly different engine note, a gear that shifts just a little rougher than usual, a brake that pulls slightly to one side. These are not random. These are early warning signals from a machine that is trying to tell you something is changing. Riders who hit 200,000 miles have trained themselves to notice when something feels or sounds different from yesterday, and they investigate immediately, not next week, not after the weekend ride, immediately. Because a problem caught at the early signal stage costs a fraction of what it costs when it's left to become a failure. This habit alone has saved more engines than any other on this list. Habit 7. They store it right. Even when the bike isn't being ridden, it's either aging gracefully or aging badly. The difference is how it's stored. Long mileage riders never store a bike with a dirty air filter, old oil, or an empty fuel tank. They never leave it in direct sunlight for extended periods. They keep tires off concrete where possible, because concrete draws moisture and accelerates tire degradation from the contact patch outward. For storage beyond 2 weeks, they run the fuel down or use a fuel stabilizer. They cover the bike, not with a plastic cover that traps moisture, but with a breathable cover that protects without creating condensation. Because a bike that's stored right comes back to life quickly. A bike stored carelessly comes back with problems that compound into expensive repairs. Here's the honest truth about 200,000-mile motorcycles. They aren't special machines. They aren't maintained by professionals with secret knowledge. They're just ridden by people who do these 7 things consistently, every single week, without skipping. The riders who replace engines at 40,000 kilometers and the riders who hit 200,000 without a rebuild are often riding the same model. The only difference is habit. You now know exactly what those habits are. The only question is whether you'll use them. If this video helped you, subscribe, because every video on this channel is built to give you exactly this kind of real, practical knowledge. See you in the next one.